Welcome to the Church Collective podcast. My name is Ryan, and in this episode, myself and Chris Bellamy had the opportunity to talk to Matt Maher, and we were both blown away. Like everybody knows, he's kind of like one of the best worship leaders, pastors you could know, but man, he just unpacks so much wisdom for us. Just his experience in music and just his pastoral heart and just the way he leads worship was just absolutely fantastic. So I enjoyed this chat. I hope you enjoy listening to it or watching it if you're on YouTube. You can find us on YouTube or anywhere you podcast or Facebook, or we're trying to be everywhere we can be. But let's jump right in with the Church Collective podcast.
Really quick, a little bit about myself. I grew up in Newfoundland, Canada. 25 years ago this year, I moved to Arizona, Phoenix, on the 3rd of July. I remember that because I woke up the next day. It was a Sunday and it was the 4th of July. So I figured we were going to blow things up because I was like, that's what you do in America on the 4th of July. Yeah. And my cousin invited me to church. So I went to church with her. And then we went and blew things up. But I started going back to church and kind of got involved in ministry then. I ended up finishing my music degree as Arizona State University and then worked at a church for 13 years full time as a worship pastor. That whole time, my life for whatever reason has moved in like 7-year increments. So the day that I started working full-time in full-time ministry, I was graduated from college. It was 1999. And I remember the first day of work, I went in and there was this like side chapel and I was in praying and I had my Bible and I read this scripture passage that was actually open. There was another Bible in the chapel that was open to this scripture passage, and I read it, and I felt like God was saying, "This is it's like a life verse, that kind of thing." But then, anyways, I worked there. The other thing was, I felt like I heard the phrase 7 years, and like kind of not audibly, but like in my heart. I worked there full time, 7 years to the day. And so since then, it's kind of like my life has sort of moved in like 7-year chapters. So that's a real long preamble to say that when I made All the People Said Amen in 2013, that was sort of the culmination of like the end of a 7-year period where I signed a record deal and was transitioning out of like full-time local church ministry from a worship leading standpoint. You're never really out of local church ministry because that really is the only ministry there is. Is everything is just an extension of the local church. That album was like a culmination of 7 years of writing songs and building relationships and just different things that God was doing. So Alive and Breathing, which came out in March, it's kind of the same thing. I kind of looked back on the past 7 years of living in Nashville, getting plugged into 2 local churches, leading, writing songs with lots of different people, traveling. And so I was trying to figure out what this album was, and I wanted to model it after All the People Said Amen, where it was like a hybrid of songs that we recorded live and new studio stuff. And so for me, it kind of came out as that. It's almost like kind of a retrospective of the past 7 years.
Yeah.
And then kind of moving forward.
That's really cool. So Alive and Breathing seems to be doing really well. Could you speak to maybe, just did you know that one was going to be kind of like the one that might take off? Like, tell me a little bit about like the process for that song and just you've seen a number of songs pop that you've written. So what does it feel like? How do you know when you're like, oh, this one's special, or is it kind of always, oh, there you go, like they like it?
No, I don't think so at all. And what's interesting about that song was that a lot of other songs that I've written, particularly in writing worship music, like I've always come in with a strong sense of like I always say that when you're writing songs for the church, you're the storehouse of ideas is your personal prayer life and your personal devotional life.
Yeah.
And so it's in those kind of interior quiet moments where it's just you and God, or you're in the midst of serving in some local context where there is a great opportunity for your ego to die. And in some ways it's like you're in a place where you're kind of taken for granted. And I don't mean in a toxic sense or an unhealthy sense, but in as much of a sense of like, people just see you as for you and not as like there's no celebrity attached to who you are.
Yeah.
And even in the midst of leading in those situations, even in the midst of like I said, your personal prayer time, song ideas pop. And for me, they've always been like, it isn't always a melodic idea or like a musical chord change idea. That happens sometimes, but a lot of times it's a sense of revelation of, I need to write a song about this, whatever it is. That's what Lord, I Need You was.
Yeah.
And now the answer to the question, like, is the song going to take off or is it not going to take off? There's a certain point of it that it's like, a lot of it can come down to the right performance at the right time. Computers can hide a multitude of mistakes, but they can't, they don't hide the truth. And so you could tune someone's vocal so that it sounds perfect, but that's only like 30% of the information. The rest of it is like it's feeling and it's emotion and it's the spirit, you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
So some of that is just in the power of like a performance, however frail and broken it is. So with Alive and Breathing, Ellie and I wrote the song and we didn't really have an idea what we were going to write about. We just kind of got together. We had written once before and we had a good idea started, but we never finished it. So the only thing I had in my mind was, man, I just want to finish the song today. That's all. I want to make sure that we've got a song over a certain level of completion that, like, even if we have to text back and forth because she lives in England, we're going to finish this thing.
Yeah.
And I was dealing with a lot of anxiety in my life at the time. I was, I've got 3 young kids. And so the things that I'm anxious about are maybe different than someone in their 20s, but,
Sure.
But fear is fear. And, the very real sense of panic that can come from it. So we started writing this song. Ellie was talking about, people who abandon their sense of, abandon that inner sense of like childlike wonder, people who abandon dreams, out of a sense of like, wounded pragmatism. And so we just started writing this song. We didn't really have a goal in mind, which I was kind of a bit scared at that point, because then I was like, oh no, we're just going to meander around and we're not going to get a song.
Yeah.
And then the chorus started to emerge. And then halfway through the writing process, while like scarfing down lunch, eating lunch and talking about the song, the phrase sort of emerged of, if you're still alive and breathing, praise the Lord. And the night before, I'd gone for a walk with my daughter, and she said, she's 4, or she was 5 at the time.
Yeah.
And I said, Daddy's going to write a song tomorrow. And she said, write a song about everything. And I thought Psalm 150.
Yeah.
So we wrote the song, but neither one of us knew, what would transpire a year later.
Sure. Yeah.
And then that was even its own, there was a sense of like, either I was thinking to myself, I'm like, well, this is either the Lord's timing or the worst possible timing ever. But maybe God's timing sometimes feels like the worst possible time ever for us.
Sure. Yeah.
So I got to lead the song a handful of times on the road, on this tour that I was on called the Road Show. And man, I just can't wait to get out and to get to play this and sing the song again, you know?
Yeah, sure.
So it became this anthem throughout the course of the year last year. As I was working on it, we recorded the crowd, the gang vocals. Half of the gang vocals are actually an audience, we were on a tour called the Roadshow, and one night, it was actually the night in Phoenix, we had everyone, in Ontario, California, I taught everyone that the tagline and the chorus, praise the Lord, and we recorded them singing it.
Nice.
So it the song followed me around the whole year, I think, in a way. So
that's awesome. You mentioned your daughter kind of inspired a little. That's Rowan, right?
Yeah.
So looking at your Instagram a couple of days ago, she's like, you're doing songs from Rowan. Like, to talk a little bit, like, she's making those up as you're doing it? Like,
yeah, she's like a freestyling queen. And we're just trying to, I think, like any parent, you just try to, I grew up in an age where you did things that you were good at, and the things that you weren't good at, you just sort of stopped doing. You know what I mean? So like, yeah. I wasn't good. I wanted to be a ninja, but I have a mild bleeding disorder, so that's not a good idea.
Right.
Rowan she just started gravitating towards writing songs, and I'd sit down and play at the piano, and she'll just kind of spontaneously sing stuff, which is fine. So now she hears Alive and Breathing, and she's like, "That's my song." So I'm like, "Oh man, here we go."
Right.
Yeah. Even in that, I think what I would say, just to kind of further answer the question you asked of like, how do you know when a song is special or when a song isn't?
Yeah.
I think there's a degree of scale. I know when something is commercially good.
Sure.
It's catchy, it's hooky, but they're also, like it makes you feel a certain way. But I've gone back to like square one with music, which is kind of like with having a 6-year-old, you kind of do, which is like asking her, why do you like this song?
Yeah.
If she likes something. And it's usually because it moves her. And so I think as a believer, as a Christian who's trying to write congregational music, it's sort of like the first question is like, does this move me? Some people would say, well, the first question you need to ask is it true what you're saying? Is it true? And I would say, well, I think that goes without saying. It should go without saying.
Yeah, sure.
That is the lyric. Does the lyric maintain fidelity to the scriptures? Like that, to me, it's like that's like really, really important. And then, but yeah, just another ask the question, like, does this genuinely move you? I think right now we're in a time where like so much worship music is being made.
Yeah.
And the temptation is that we just sort of like, we look at what someone else is doing and we just go, I want to write a song that feels like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually the beginning of any developing any voice is plagiarism.
Sure.
It's the highest form of flattery.
Right.
But then I think the next question is, at some point you have to venture out and say, okay, these songs come from this church or this community or this writer and their unique relationship with God. But then have the audacity and the self-assuredness to look and go, well, wait a second, I'm a child of God. I'm unique. I'm a unique individual. There's no one like me in the world. My struggles I've shared struggles and shared ideals and shared dreams, but the way that I see them can be unique. So how do I develop that? How do I start figuring out, and I think that comes primarily from listening to God.
Yeah, that's great.
So you said you wrote Alive and Breathing remotely, like was it over Skype or?
Well, it started in person. It started in
Oh, okay.
person, and then we texted back and forth, and then we got in person. So it's like it was a combination of I think different mediums, and I think we hopped on FaceTime at one point, which wasn't. FaceTime's not good. Like Zoom. I've done a lot of Zoom rights in this quarantine, actually.
That's what I was going to ask you. Like, have you been doing more and more of that now with the quarantine?
Yeah. I mean, but I mean, primarily that's been it. I think since restrictions eased up in Nashville, I've had 2 rights in person, but primarily it's still over Zoom. And it's really good in the sense that, like, you know, I don't know if this is true, but it feels like the internet was built to be like one giant 2-way radio. Like, it's not designed for people to have simultaneous communication. And the only reason that's a drag when you're writing a song, I think particularly a worship song, is there's something about the first time you get to sing a song as a group of people, or as 2 people, that when you're singing a song together after you've written it, there's this sense of agreement. And what's a drag right now is it's hard. It's really impossible. You can't do it on FaceTime, and Zoom's a little bit better, but there's still lag. And so whenever you try to sing a song together at the same time, somebody starts falling behind. So the guy who figures that out,
they got it. Yeah.
He's gonna own an island.
Yeah, Ryan and I were watching the Jars of Clay, like a live thing, and it seemed like they were actually playing live, but from different locations. But we were like,
trying to figure it
out. Is this possible, or is this a really good, like, pre-recorded thing? You know,
it could be a couple of options. You know, they they're dear friends, and they actually have this great rehearsal space that's big enough that they probably, I don't know. I'm gonna text them and find out.
They're probably all in the same building.
Just like literally socially distanced. Because that's one of the things that, as soon as this happened, I just started researching. I was like, okay, someone has to have built some sort of application that allows people to play music simultaneously. And no one has yet.
Man, so somebody needs to jump in, like you said, own an island.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who else did you co-write with on the album?
This album, I think so. There are, like, you know, I re-recorded White Flag. That song was written with Jason Ingram and Chris Tomlin and Matt Redman. And Come As You Are, which was co-written with David Crowder and Ben Glover. Let me look here. Here For You, which is another song that I wrote with Matt Redman and Jesse Reeves and Tim Wanstall, who's actually a guy from a band called Athlete in the UK. Soul on Fire, which was with the guys from Third Day. Run to the Father's a newer song that I co-wrote with Cody Kearns and Rand Jackson. I actually wrote it the week after I wrote Alive and Breathing. And then a song called Light the Way, which is a new song, which was co-written with Sean Curran and another writer named, why am I blanking on his name? Jess Cates. And then Come Holy Spirit, which is a song that Martin Smith had recorded that I sort of jumped in on the tail end of. He'd written it with a bunch of folks from his church community, St. Peter's in Brighton. And so it really is, you know, and then obviously Lord, I Need You. Lord of My Life's another new one I wrote with Jonathan Smith and Rand Jackson. And then there's a song on there called Joyful Noise, which was like an 11th hour song that I co-wrote with Bernie Herms, who's the producer on that song, and a guy named Simon Dumas. And Simon is from Gibraltar, and he's in a band called King Calloway, which is like it's a sort of like a pop country band. Yeah, so it's like a pretty big smorgasbord of people.
That's awesome.
Do you like doing like two people co-writes, or do you like doing bigger, or what do you prefer?
I think it just depends. I would say to me, two or three is like the sweet spot.
Yeah.
I think two is great. If the two people know each other. If they don't know each other, having a third is really helpful, because especially if it's like, let's say one person's the artist, and then or one person's like the person who wants to carry the song, and then the other two are collaborators. It can help diversify things, or if you say like you get, okay, well, let's get three of us together, and one person's like the stronger singer, the other person's like really good at kind of creating a bed of music, and the other person's really good at lyrics. And typically, like in Nashville circles, that's what you would see a lot, is there will be a guy there who's like has a real strong editing sense, in terms of like the ability, if someone says out a phrase and they're like, oh, what if you switch that word with this word? Or they sing out a melody and they're like, oh, what if instead of that note it was this note? It's like they know what it shouldn't be, and in the process they help it be what it should be. And it's interesting when you talk about co-writes like that too, because people start to try to quantify what someone's ability or what they bring in terms of their the actual words they contribute or the melody they write. And like, I would just offer a word of caution. It's just caution. It's not, I don't know. I'm not an authority. To me, if three people walk into a room and there wasn't a song, and then there is, I think it's really hard to quantify what everyone does, and to somehow attribute the worth of it, of saying, oh, well, you just sat in the corner and just flipped at your Instagram feed the whole time, therefore we're not going to give you any share of the song. Also, I think because I think God rewards the spirit of hospitality and generosity. And so to me, it's like if three creative people, like I've tried to do this as much as I can, of like, I think if you bring an idea that's pretty much finished, that's one thing. But I think if like all three of you got together and you're like hanging out and having a cup of coffee and you're chatting and you're talking or you're praying, and someone shares a scripture, and the next thing you know, boom, a song gets written. I think it's good just to honor everyone and say, man, we all got to watch this thing be created we watched something come out of nothing. And we should share in that.
Yeah, that's great. Chris and I both have music degrees too. You said you got your music degree and then went into church work. Could you maybe speak to the value that's had in just your career?
Oh man. Yeah, it's kind of hard to quantify, I think, in some sense, because I did 7 years of undergraduate study. I didn't plan on it. It's just I moved after my third year and then basically had to start over. So in Canada, I was at Memorial University School of Music in Newfoundland, where I grew up. And I did 3 years it was 2 years of just general music studies, right? I was a piano major, and you're just and then the third year, after your third year is when you're supposed to kind of declare, after your second year, you declare whether or not you're a music educational major. And so I declared theory and composition because I didn't practice enough at the time to be a performance major.
Yeah.
So I was interested more in composition. Everyone kind of knew, like, oh, he's creative, he writes. The kind of composition there was more like neo, I wouldn't say neoclassical. I would say 20th century composition.
Sure. Okay.
So the guy who's the head of the department there it was all like, mixed media, modern composition, John Cage, Philip Glass, using reel-to-reel machines and prepared pianos.
Hmm.
All like real kind of, modern stuff, 12-tone row type stuff.
Yeah.
And I'd studied music theory, and then I moved to Arizona and I took a jazz piano class because it was the only credit hour I could afford. It was $350 a credit hour. And I worked at a coffee shop and practiced piano 6 hours a day and took jazz piano studio. And I had to get residency in Arizona. So I had to live there for a year so I could get in-state tuition. And then I got a tuition scholarship through the jazz department for jazz piano. So then I mostly just practiced, and I took a couple of upper division music elective classes. Like one was on recording, one was 16th century counterpoint.
Yeah.
So like, Palestrina, some Bach.
Sure.
And then, but then the rest of it's like general studies. I had to retake English and math and sciences and,
Nice.
but I had so much music school experience in Canada. I played in youth symphony and sang in chamber choirs, and I accompanied musical theater students through 3 years of college in Newfoundland, played in a rock band, played piano in a hotel bar.
Nice.
I kind of just had a ton of musical like experience, and I would say all of it is a teacher. Because I remember there was this guy who was an upright bass player who came to the jazz department at ASU, and he gave like a master class. It was so strong. I can't remember his name, but I found out after he was a Christian, but he was kind of like, you could tell like, I think this guy was a hippie during the Jesus movement, and eventually he just kind of became a Christian because he talked for like 45 minutes about listening. And I just remember at the time, 21, 22-year-old me just going like, oh, well, I think this guy just likes the sound of his own voice. But what I would say is actually I've gone back in retrospect and went, man, he was right. In the sense that like, I think God's always teaching us and speaking to us through circumstance and through different events. And so, the formal classroom training and stuff is really, really important.
Yeah.
But then also the lived experience of like playing a gig and lugging in your own equipment and setting it up and playing and nobody paying any attention to you.
Sure.
I think it helped, and then taking all of that and then being in a local church context and so much of it going, well, so much of this doesn't even apply. And going, I have to learn a totally different set of skills now. And these are going to be way more like pastoral in dimension. I have to learn, but it's like, I have to learn how to listen to people. And it's like, well, but I played in a jazz combo and I learned how to listen to the bass player and I learned how to listen to the drummer. So I just have to learn how to listen to this wonderful retired person who sings alto parts slightly out of tune every week at the 5 o'clock service on Saturdays. And then your faith kicks in, right? Because you're like, somehow the way that I do this actually could glorify God, which to go what you said, where it's like, there's so much emphasis right now in terms of being on a platform.
Yeah.
And not necessarily a ton of emphasis on like deferring to all the other people that are on the platform with you.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
Hey, Brian, let me ask.
I give long answers. I'm sorry.
That's
Yes,
fantastic.
As soon as you said, you're talking about jazz, I'm super curious who your favorite jazz pianists are.
I was really, really into Bill Evans, McCoy Tyner, Thelonious Monk, Keith Jarrett, obviously is just amazing. His solo record stuff is incredible. Oscar Peterson, obviously, because I'm a Canadian, and just his story, to me, is like so. I mean, that guy just literally just played hours and hours and hours and hours and hours a day as a kid, young man. Just his playing was so virtuosic. But I would say, pound for pound. Oh, yeah. I think it's. Hold on. Yeah, it's not this. Yeah, John Medeski. He's not really a piano player, but he's in a band called Medeski, Martin and Wood.
Mhm.
And he's a keyboard player. So he plays B3, he plays, Whirly or Rhodes. He plays a bunch of different stuff, but yeah, his playing is just unreal. Phenomenal. So yeah, it's kind of, I would say it's all those, honestly too, like my piano teacher in college, a guy by the name of Chuck Moronic, was just, he was taught by Vince Maggio, who is it's the guy at University of Miami who taught Bruce Hornsby. And but Chuck was a fierce solo jazz piano player. I mean, still, I'm sure still is. He's retired, and really, I learned a lot, and was also severely intimidated every day for 4 years.
That's awesome. That's a good way to go about it.
Do you ever get to like a 5-chord in worship and you're just like, man, I want to throw an altered scale or a tritone sub in here real bad?
It's funny when I did a couple of weekends of events with Cory Asbury, and it's funny. Like, I would say, like, a huge props to him. That guy is just pure talent, and we would stay up late on the bus listening to music at night, and his ear is freakish. So there were times when him and I were on stage together, and he'd be playing a song, and I'd start throwing in chord substitutions occasionally.
Mhm.
He wouldn't miss a beat though. Like, and it's like,
Wow.
Here's a guy who's like, he has no formal jazz ear training, but can totally hang. Israel Houghton, actually, the first co-write I ever did was with Israel Houghton and one of my mentors.
Oh man.
And that guy, just like yeah. I mean, you could put on his headstone, try to keep up, because his ear was insane. So there was a period of time, I would say in the late 90s, early 2000s, where I felt like in worship you could get away a lot more with that stuff. We are probably in the most diatonic era of music in music history as a whole.
Gosh.
We're almost at a point where basically everything is just a plagal cadence.
Yeah.
That's great. Could you, I'd love to hear, like, maybe just looking at your, like, Lord, I Need You is one that, like, I think a lot of people just always do. Like, could you speak a little bit towards, I mean, I don't know how many thousands of times you've probably led that song. How do you keep that fresh? And I'm kind of thinking of the worship leader that's like, coming week in, week out, leading worship. Like, what are you doing spiritually to just make sure you're in a place to lead the room well when you're doing something that's so routine at this point for you?
I mean, I guess I'd say, I mean, that's just, I mean, I think that's just, at this point, that's just the Christian life. How do you wake up every day? It says God's mercies are new every morning.
Yeah.
So how does mercy stay new? Well, the only way mercy stays new, I guess, in the human context is if my sinfulness stays new. And that doesn't give me license to just go sin as much as I want, as much as it is as it's an infinite journey into the Paschal mystery. A friend of mine is a theologian, said, if you're ever stuck with a question in Christianity, the answer is always Paschal mystery, which is a fancy way of saying the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Mm. The problem is that we look at the death and resurrection of Jesus as an event and not as a way of living that we've been baptized into. We've been sort of called into, right? So, and Paul says, it is no longer I, but it is Christ, who lives in me. So every day I'm called into death of self and preeminence of Christ and his resurrection power alive in me. And so what I would say is, first and foremost, if you're sick of singing songs, don't look at the song.
Yeah.
Look at you. Because all these songs they're just mirrors. Like, that's what they're supposed to be, right? So why would I ever the only reason I'd get sick of holding up a mirror is if I got sick of what I was seeing. Huh. And I was afraid to admit it to myself.
That's great.
So, Lord, I need you. The trick with worship songwriting is that you write stuff that you have to sing every day of your life. So don't pursue something that's cool for the sake of being cool. I love innovation in lyrics. I'm all about like expanding the frontiers of our grammar, so that but there's got to be a point like that. That's not an end even of itself. And the problem is that when we make it an end even of itself, it can't sustain us. So then that's how we end up, I think, drifting away from the call to journey with Christ. And so what I think, like, for me, I when I sing Lord, I need you, when I sing those lines, even if I don't feel it, I can still agree with it. And there's power in agreeing. There's power in agreement. So, Lord, I come, I confess, bowing here, I find my rest. I'm pretty anxious right now, but I know that's true. So I agree with it. It's true. I acknowledge it's true. And in that interior acknowledgement, there's a little death of self that's happening, right? There's a little bit of like, without you, I fall apart. Well, that's true. I've experienced that in my life. Maybe not now, but I've definitely experienced without Christ, things start to come apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Once again, it's like, that's a true statement. And then comes the confession. And I think the thing is that we equate the power of God with the power of our confession. That's real dangerous, man.
Yeah.
Because emotions are fickle.
Sure.
So they change. And a lot of times, our emotional response to God is usually, our emotions are a response to something. So if it's sort of like saying, like, God, if I'm moved in worship, let me be moved by something true. So if I'm moved by my own grief or sorrow, that's great, but let it move me to you. And if I'm convicted, let it be that I was moved by your spirit and by the truth.
Yeah.
So I think, it's 2020. So it's 18 years since I wrote Your Grace Is Enough. And I've pretty much sung that song every time I've led worship. And the other thing I'll say this is that so much about leading worship, I think in the Psalms, David, there's a lot of focus on memory in the sense of like, and a lot of times we can make declarative statements about who God is because of who he says he is in the scriptures, but also because of the evidence of who he's been in our life.
Yeah.
And if he's the same yesterday and today and forever, we can declare that over our future, right?
Right.
So your grace is enough for me now is like a spiritual rolodex. When I'm singing that song, I'm thinking about all the times in my life where I've led that song from a real authentic place. And even though I don't feel the same feelings as I did then, I can still acknowledge that that was real and that happened.
Yeah.
And I can say, thanks for that memory. And so I'm singing in agreement with it once again. And, you know, I think, I mean, I would say, I think humility is so, you know, there's a reason why they say that pride is the root of all sin.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think it's always good to check your pride level as you're leading a song.
Sure.
And it doesn't, and once again, like it doesn't have to be like this big ordeal. Like if you're leading a song and you kind of realize, man, I'm really focused on how I'm singing, how I look, how this sounds. I don't really care about the spiritual implications of what I'm singing or what's happening. It doesn't have to be a big deal, but you can just make you can have an honest conversation with God in your heart in that moment and be like, oh, all right, Lord, I'm off track. I'll let it go. And just help me focus on you. Give me grace to, it doesn't have to be this big ordeal, you know what I mean? And I think just sort of that kind of, it's like maintenance in a way.
Yeah. That's great.
I think would help.
Before we let you go, I'm dying to know, you said not all of that behind you is yours. Is that your space?
Yeah. So this is the control room of my kind of, it's like a writing / content studio. So when we found the house that we bought 7 years ago, there was this building behind it that was like a machine shop. It kind of looks like a giant detached garage, but it was like all concrete floors and no working, like barely any working electricity. Pin boards on the walls, no insulation. And so over the years, I've kind of renovated it, turned it into a writing studio. And then just different guys that live around this area of town. Everyone's kind of pulled their gear together. And so it's kind of like a cooperative. And everyone kind of gets access to it. And I've just tried to kind of keep it that way. But I've made the past 3 albums here, and it's been a huge, huge help. I think especially in this season too. Like my heart goes out to anybody who's trying to write songs on Zoom with, in a bathroom, and their kids are. It's like, God bless you. It's just, the circumstances are crazy as it is, but yeah, so this has been a huge help for sure.
Would you mind sharing your signal chain for your vocals?
Yeah. It honestly changes a lot, but usually back there on a stand is a Bach 251, which is David Bach's model of a Telefunken. And I've had that microphone now for 5 years. And usually, like, I did a bunch of records with a producer named Paul Moak, who has a studio in Nashville.
Smokestack.
Yeah, and Paul's studio, he, especially during quarantine, like, he kind of documented everything, all of his gear. He did it's really great stuff. So if you're a gearhead or you're into studio stuff, go check it out. But we kind of figured out that my voice sounds great. Kind of on 3 things. It's either a 251 or a U47 or an SM7. So I pretty much I don't have a U47, but I have an SM7. So if I'm here, I'll usually cut a vocal on a 251, and it's running through one of Rupert Neve's Shelford series channel strips.
Mhm.
So it's got the preamp, the EQ, the compression, and then it's got a silk button. And so silk is that variable like 28K headroom thing that you can either there's 3 settings. One is off, the other one is modeled after when he worked it for Neve, and then the other one is and that's blue, and then the red is modeled after the Focusrite kind of pre's. And so it just changes the character of the headroom.
Mhm.
And then I also have in that signal chain, I have an 1176 F revision, which was just kind of the revision that I was kind of looking for. It's kind of that kind of late 70s rock, like super aggressive, but I just love how it sounds. So that sometimes is in there, sometimes it's not. A lot of just depends on who I'm working with. Some people don't like how it sounds. They feel like it's like, it's not a distressor, that it's totally, it adds a ton of character to a vocal, and not everyone likes that when they're mixing. Some people want things to be as, discreet or as transparent as possible, so you can color a vocal more in a mix. But that's kind of it. And then, but when I do stuff on the road, I have a road rig that when I was touring that I would travel with, and that I would just run through the Apollo. There's an Apollo 8 in there, and then I would just sing into an SM7.
Mhm.
And half my Christmas record is that. And although a couple of the songs we brought out the Shelford and just kind of installed it in there, so we were still using the Shelford, but we ran it. But I sang through an SM7. And dude, like I would say, if you're gonna buy a microphone for home recording, an SM7 is like the best investment you could make, because that thing is so versatile. It's so unidirectional. You could be in a bedroom and be yelling into it, and somebody could be watching TV in the next room, and they probably won't. You probably won't hear it.
Mm-hmm.
You can record guitar with it if you wanted to, if you're in a pinch, and it doesn't. It sounds fine. It's essentially an SM57 with a little bit more something, but that's the microphone that Tom Petty sang into for his whole career. So it worked out well for him.
Hey, thank you so much for being a part of this episode. Would love to connect with you. Head over to Instagram, shoot us a DM, or shoot us a DM on Facebook, or get in the Facebook, The Church Collective Community Facebook group. We would just love to connect with you in all the ways we can. We're also doing a number of Zoom hangs. If you go to thechurchcollective.com and hit that Zoom hangs button, we have Zoom hangs for basically whatever kind of part of worship ministry you're in. We are trying to make one for you. So get involved, get connected. Cannot wait to see you in there.